All right, we're back.
B-Side.
Yeah, well, I say back. Well, technically we're back because we've done this before. I've got a couple podcast homies with me today. We're rolling out kind of a new theme, new experiment here. I have a feeling it'll have traction, it'll have legs, because we will be talking about all things STL. 314-636-618. Don't forget those guys over there.
618.
618ers. I still remember. Do you guys remember your childhood phone number?
Yep.
Home or mobile?
See, you're a little younger. There were no mobile when I was a kid. 618-877-3332.
I remember my first home phone number.
314-872-9535.
There you go, man. It's
818-790-9191.
818.
In fact, I think those home numbers are the only numbers left that I know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I know maybe a few cell phone numbers.
Yeah, everything else is
my neighbors,
Face ID,
parents, friends' parents. I know their numbers.
So, JB, here's a deep cut. I think in one of our first podcasts, you asked what was the most famous area code.
212.
281-330-8004. Hit Mike Jones up on the low.
Oh, my God.
Yep.
Hey, we're rolling in here. We're B-Side STL. We're going to be talking about news, events, culture, food, music, real estate, water parks, and everything in between that involves the St. Louis region. Intended to spur a little conversation as to what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong. And if you are from afar, we're going to give you kind of a little bit of a challenge as to, does it become a vacation destination? Do you stop in for 24 hours, or do you just say, fly over, baby? And depending on how well we do, Explorer STL may or may not like it. So this is all about that hotel revenue, right?
That's right.
Right.
That marginal incremental dollar.
So in honor of the show, I'm going to lead each one of these off with a little STL tune. This song was recorded at the Gaslight studio back in the day. Mr. Brian Owens, Northside own.
Oh, so good.
Brian Owens, and produced and band leader was Al Halliday. So two heavyweights here in St. Louis. When a Grown Man Cries. Go on Spotify, you'll find it. Check it out. Feels like 1969 Motown. Anyway, let's get this thing going here. The idea is to kind of move around the table a little bit. A couple news items, couple pop culture items. Gave you guys a little bit of homework. Dave, I know you're a studious young lad because you are the puppy at the table. By the way, own it, keep it, feel good about it.
The geriatric millennial.
Yeah. What? Drop it on us. Let's get this thing going. What news is tickling your fancy?
I want to tell you about something I love, which is, I don't remember who said it. I don't remember where it came from. But the idea that St. Louis and the Muny is where Broadway comes for the summer. Mm-hmm. I think that is a crisp, clear, accurate message that reflects the high quality, distinct investment and accessibility of the arts in St. Louis that most of our other messaging waters down with the esoteric and the specific. And I think it's totally accurate. I think it's wonderful. I think it's terrific branding and advertising. And I think we should do more of it.
I love it, and I'm stealing it. I've been saying the Broadway opera farm team, and where Broadway comes for the summer is much better.
I'll put the negative spin on that because if you put that in the blender of the St. Louis consensus marketing, it would turn into something, like Broadway of the Prairie, or
Yes.
Broadway Midwest, or
Silicon Prairie.
STL is musical theater, or something horrible like that.
Yeah.
And I think what we get wrong so much, and I think what's so positive about that message, is that the artists are here, the venues are here, the management is here. I mean, it's not just the artist, it's the stage management, it's the curation of those things.
Yep.
And I think reflecting the fact that this is where Broadway comes for the summer, suggests something the same way,
For Broadway summers.
the same way that like when you talk about Saint-Tropez,
Yep.
right? You don't need to talk about what's there or who's there. It's just, it's Saint-Tropez. This
I
is
don't talk about places I can't spell though.
The Hamptons of Broadway.
They don't.
The Nantucket, the
Muny.
Nantucket of the arts.
So
Yeah.
I'll play
Of Broadway.
I'll play stats boy here. The Muny, just some quick FYI facts. Maybe a quick guess. What year do you guys think Muny opened? Guesses?
100 years ago. So
Pretty close.
I'd say.
Was that a World's Fair venue?
19
No, it was post.
It was post World's Fair.
1917. Yeah.
So over 100 years.
Yeah, over 100 years. 1917, constructed for $10,000. It $10,000 in today's dollars would be $288. Well, they're never building that thing for 200. I mean, that would be the cost of the handrail package.
That was, that's like Works Progress Administration labor rates. I mean, this is like a nickel a day and 3 hots and a cot.
Yeah, here's a little bit of my take, just as it applies to our conversation. With the Muny and its relationship to the city and what can the value add or the brand identity, the thing. I'm going to go to COVID and kind of everything that we experience these days is really through a post-COVID lens, and having owned kind of a communal space, a studio, a bar, an event space, during those years, and then seeing kind of the shift in demand and attitudes towards events and people gathering. Anything outside is high value.
Yep.
Inside spaces, short of being new and really high end and really well done, i.e. the factory out in the valley, exceptional job out there. These amphitheaters that are open, feel big, feel bigger than they are. They're extremely valuable, and the Muny kind of checks all those boxes. And I think also the Muny, we talk about these generational shifts of interest in, be it food or pop culture or music or whatever. The Muny, for this new generation of Zers, right? What did they grow up with? Hamilton.
Yep. Hamilton.
So
Sure.
they're, prior to Hamilton, cool kids, if you said, hey, let's go to a Broadway show, they'd be like, you want to fight?
Well, wait a minute. You're both Xers, so you grew up in the.
Oh, that was
My favorite
completely
musical is
unacceptable.
Phantom of the Opera, right? So like you grew up when that
Same.
was
Yep.
the business.
Big
Now
time.
I couldn't name 3 musicals. My wife would go every now and then, but I was more dive bar. See, pre-COVID, indoor smoking, check. Asses to elbows, check.
You're more Mississippi
all that.
Nights
Oh,
nostalgia.
100%. I got a little what are those little wish boxes or your history boxes where you put your your report card and stuff. I got one box that has all my Mississippi Nights tickets.
So the one thing I do wish though, anybody who's listening to this podcast knows I grew up in LA, and one of the crown jewels of Los Angeles is the Hollywood Bowl.
The Hollywood Bowl.
And there's the part of the mystique of the Hollywood Bowl is that there's restrictions on how many performances they can do because of the traffic and noise it generates for the
Yeah,
neighbors.
it's all the NIMBYs.
I would also say look at what Red Rocks has done.
Red Rocks.
Totally
second
agree.
to none.
So if I could wish cast
And
to
we
the
kind of
Muny,
can have the inner city equivalent, so don't try to make it Red Rocks, but
you could do that on the North Riverfront and
that
have,
should be front and center in our.
I do wonder why the Muny doesn't do more crossover, because I was just my wife and mother-in-law and sister-in-law and a group of them are going to the Muny. We are not season ticket holders. They rarely go for theater or Broadway, but they did buy tickets to the Diana Ross, John Batiste. And we were trying to explain to you earlier, John Batiste he's kind of relevant these days. He's pretty big.
Just a little bit.
And the music events there are few and far between, really.
And then John Legend was last year,
Correct.
and then that was the first live music show they've had in many, many years. Correct.
Yeah, and I think that maybe I'm not going to tell them how to run their business because they've been doing it since 1917.
Right.
But I do believe that in the park, because they're logistically, it's kind of easy in and out. There's good parking. It feels safe. It is safe.
Yep.
The park is part of it. The blanket, the little picnic beforehand.
I like it.
For sure.
So
well, and that's a lot of the allure of the Hollywood Bowl, is it is a stadium, and there are these booths in there.
the before.
But there's even in the concessions, there's a picnic,
a protocol.
garden on the green kind of a vibe to the place.
Very cool.
That makes it not $8 Budweiser night at the ballpark to see a big name act kind of thing.
Right.
Anthony, what you got, man?
What do I got lately?
You got some news for me? What's your
I tried my first slinger dog at Busch Stadium a week ago, and it holds up.
With the spaghetti on
It's a lot with the 2 fried eggs.
oh my God!
It was a lot in the heat, so we split it. But
Is that
outstanding process there.
Is it LHM? Is that the operator?
Yeah.
Is that a in-house product, or is that a Steve's product? Or
No, it was just I don't. It was a stadium product. It wasn't a restaurant. It wasn't a specific restaurant.
What's the difference between the concessions at Busch Stadium and the
City Park?
City Park?
Everything is the difference between the two.
Yeah.
Busch Stadium is traditional. You're going to get your pretzels and your nachos and everything, and you're going to have a few elevated options, but most of them are still under the umbrella.
Why is Ben and Jerry's the provider of ice cream at Busch Stadium and not the other
Clementine,
Prairie Farms,
or
Farm Fresh, or whatever? it is.
Heavely, Prairie Farm?
Yeah.
Geez.
Oberweis?
Ted Drew's?
otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, well, so that exact question is the kind of questions that the Cardinals ownership
Delaware North
has been really, really slow to integrate into their operations, into their experiences. They had a pretty famous fail, which I really applaud the vendor, that being Joya's. A couple of years ago, they went in there, and there was going to be hot salamis on site, and day one, the Cardinals wanted to run it all, and the team from Joya's was there watching it, and they're like, no, don't do that. That's not how you do that. Make sure you do no, that's not enough. They kept telling them this, if you're going to do our product, do it our way. And literally, I believe it was like 48 hours into their tenure there, they were like, see ya. And I think, whatever, Major League Baseball is a behemoth compared to MLS, even though MLS teams are now worth $1 billion up. But you asked the difference between the two. MLS went 180 degrees the other direction. Gerard Kraft and Matt Seebeck and team, they came in with this concept to basically integrate all the cool from a culinary perspective, that is St. Louis, or a lot of the cool. I can't say all of the cool. So you've got Farmhouse, you've got Steve's, you've got Balkan, you name it, Soul Tacos there. I mean, so it's one of those things. It's kind of cool.
All
it's like
local
it's super
so cool.
Food courty on a really kind of juiced up level. So,
and I would argue the food that moves the needle for the region overall is all. There, a lot of them are represented.
Yeah,
there.
totally agree.
Yeah.
Beast Butchers there. So I think like when you look at the event,
crust is so good.
We've been season ticket holders since day one, and we've taken a number of friends, and we've given the tickets away to others, and the feedback is the experience is second to none. And I've been to soccer stadiums, MLS stadiums all over the country, probably 6 or 7. I've been to European experiences. I'll give it to the team here. Forget about the product on the field, the logistics, the food, et cetera, kind of along the lines of what we're talking about. Second to none.
Can I ask, what do you feel about the Gateway Studios going up in Chesterfield? Chesterfield Airport Road, the big rehearsal place.
That's another one.
That was kind of a neat.
I look at it through the lens of industry, exclusive.
Yep.
Because whenever I started Gaslight back in the day, and you know this because you would go in there, and we had conversations back then about the concept, and the idea was to try and raise the relevance and the accessibility of music, of artists, and frankly, the IP, so that you could start to create value. Because the term starving artist, while true, is one of the most annoying things in the world, and there's only a handful of cities that have figured out how to put that term to rest.
Yeah.
L.A., Chicago, New York, Atlanta, New York, or Nashville.
Nashville,
sorry. Right. they figured out how to monetize.
Yep.
So in doing all that, I was like, okay, where do you make money? How do you make money? How do you create the relationships? Because that's what it came down to.
Yeah.
Because in St. Louis proper, there are, for example, there are music attorneys here.
Yes.
But you don't really know who they are. They're very few and far between,
Yep.
and they generally don't work with St. Louis artists.
Yep.
So what good are you? The second layer would be booking agents for tours. Are there booking agents that live in this town? Sure. Are they micro? Yeah, most of them. Do we have any that work on a national level? Maybe. Do we have any that are giving back to the community to basically work with a crew of artists here that can get them out on the road and raise their relevance and raise their revenue and actually put a little star on the map for St. Louis artists? No, we don't have that. So to answer your question, Gateway, for those of you that are wondering, it's those two huge boxes that are on the south side of 40 driving out through the valley. What they are, they're macro, basically rehearsal and video production spaces. Prior to these being built, there was basically one in the country that was of the same logistical structure. And that was out somewhere in Pennsylvania, I believe. And basically, if you're Taylor Swift, if you're Chris Stapleton, if you're Ozzy and you're going on a farewell tour or whatever, you go to these locations and your whole crew and all the semis and all the gear, and for weeks at a time, you set it up, you break it down, set it up, break it down, set it up, break it down, get that right.
Imagine the work.
And then the artists come in, and their agents and their and their booking and their attorneys and everybody else, and for a week to 2 weeks they rehearse. Okay, so when I heard about it, first thing going through my mind, fuck yeah, because now we have these industry power players
Correct.
that are going to be in town for weeks at a time.
Landing.
And what are they going to do?
spirit.
They're going to eat. They're going
Yeah.
to drink. They're going to be hanging out. And if you're a little hustler,
Yeah.
you go out there and you play every open mic at every bar anywhere
Right.
close to that place, and you hope to get a gig, a deal. You know what I'm saying?
No, I absolutely.
That's kind of the story of how Atlanta started or like grew what it's become in the early late 90s, early 2000s, right?
Well, it was the movie scene. Old boy that bought all that land too. Oh my God, the production.
Tyler Perry.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, but Tyler Perry came way. He didn't. So that was an old abandoned military base. He didn't buy that till the mid 2000s. But Atlanta, and I don't know if it was a relocation of like Motown from like Detroit to Atlanta, or if there was some other nexus in Atlanta to begin with. But that was.
So I think
That was their draw, because it was sort of because Atlanta, after the '96 Olympics and the Olympic bombing, was in not great shape, and it became the nexus.
I think there's a connectivity there that might not be obvious, but it'll make sense after the fact, because I read a lot of kind of tangent articles around this, much like Seattle and Amazon and and Sub Pop and how that all played out. Atlanta. What was Atlanta really, really famous for from a pop culture standpoint in the 80s and 90s? TNT, TBS, Ted Turner.
Okay.
CNN.
CNN. Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
You had a production hub. You had videographers. You had cameramen. You had audio. You had all this industry
Fascinating.
that was coming in. Well,
24-hour news came out of Atlanta.
Exactly. And one lane over from news on TV at that time, what was the second most popular channel? MTV, VH1, etc. So I think you had a lot of like synergy between the industries there, or the silos of content. And then the other simple part of it is you had huge population, urban population. You had talented artists.
Yeah.
You had a lot of rappers there that were really good.
But
So-
the crazy thing to me, though, is that doesn't sound that much different than St. Louis in the early 2000s. Because you have Emory, you have WashU, you have the recording. When I was growing up in LA in the early 2000s, it was Nelly and the St. Lunatics, the Cardinals, Mark McGuire.
Well, I've always
had all
argued
of-
without Mark McGuire. Well, actually, the conversation yesterday with my guy, I was just talking about it. Oh my God, I'm drawing a blank.
Well, while you're thinking
Alex,
of that, my point has been nobody's cared about St. Louis since Mark McGuire was hitting home runs. Nelly was making hits.
Greatest show on turf.
Yep.
And that all overlaps. And Nelly was the soundtrack of both of those experiences.
Yep.
100%. Well, Nelly and the St. Lunatics.
And if you look
Differently.
at wasn't a huge movie, but one of the things that newcomers love to hear about when they see is Up in the Air was a very popular movie.
Yeah.
And at the time with Cinema St. Louis and Kim Tucci, was heading that. They were really promoting how St. Louis can look like 60 different markets. Logistically, if you're going to have a crew of 200 and you need to feed them and house them and transport them, how much easier it is in a market like this. And then you look at what all of these cities have. And I know, like, why isn't Ozark actually filmed here? Why aren't so many things? There's so many St. Louis stories that could be filmed here. But it's how, when people think about moving to somewhere, they think about moving to a city, they look at film, they look at art, they know and have seen all of these markets in some form or another. They've seen Nashville, they've seen Austin, they've seen New York, they've seen Brooklyn, they've seen Chicago, they've seen Boston. Hell, they've seen Pittsburgh.
They've seen Baltimore.
Exactly. So now this is our way to. So one of the things I was just excited about to see, and it looks like a big giant spaceship, kind of a colony on Mars, but unbelievable, where they're taking advantage of, you're below the ice, we're above the hurricanes, we're centrally located, and if we can start to bring in these artists and see St. Louis as a place to do all of this, I think it's one of the best branding. Who knows if it ends up working out in terms of its tax credits and things of that nature. But in terms of just pure marketing, I think it's an incredible strategy, and I was thrilled to see it come up there.
So, Stat Boy over here. I'm starting to call myself Stat
Go
Boy.
for it.
You triggered I just wanted to get the exact, you triggered something in my brain mentioning Ozark, which is one of the greatest shows ever.
Incredible show.
Based in the Ozarks, filmed in Georgia.
Right, infuriating.
The original Missouri Film Tax Credit Program expired in 2013.
Yep.
So when you start to think about the things you were just describing, and you're trying to figure out why did this all stop, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we kind of know. I mean, it came down to numbers. There was a big roadblock in 2013. It expired. In fact, the last movie that was filmed here with the credit was Gone Girl.
Yep. And also an unbelievable.
Yeah.
So now, though, it is back. And I believe one of the individuals that was key in lobbying and advocating for its reintroduction is John O'Leary.
For Heart, Souls on Fire.
Yeah.
Bingo. And it's William H. Macy is going to, and that movie's about to.
Incredible lineup of.
And
incredible cast.
They did it shoestring.
Yeah.
And they went out and he grinded, and I know John and his publicist really well, and the way they did this, they went giant hunting and knocked a few down.
Yep.
And this thing's about to come out, and it did benefit from the tax credits. It was one of the reasons they were able to make it work. Talk about like a pedestal piece as to,
Correct.
Hey, Jeff City, here's some things you need to think about because this is good branding.
I'll give you another example.
And even if it's not hard dollars, but just the soft dollars.
Oh my God,
of things in culture like that being filmed in the city, it creates a curiosity. I mean, you mentioned Baltimore. I mean, any of those things hit. They really, people coming in, they have no frame of reference. They haven't seen. They don't even know they've seen a show that had to do with St. Louis. They have no. I mean, they look at it and they're like, John Goodman's from here, and Sterling K. Brown is from here, and so's from here, and they have no idea. And it would just be so cool to sort of bring that full circle with that industry coming back in St. Louis.
Well, and I
think it would work.
The compare contrast that it would be really cool, and it would be. I don't know who it would be. I don't know what it would look like, but Danny McBride. Right, everybody knows Danny. Righteous Gemstones. He's Bound Down. He
talks about Charleston all the time.
Bingo. And do you know the story of that? Do you know how that all happened? So Danny McBride and brother Billy, that whole crew that have been in the same shows and same movies for the
Eastbound and Down. And,
Vice Principals. So the story goes, and I heard this on Smartless, And he was telling the guys on Smart List the story, and basically Danny said that they were getting ready to do, I believe, Eastbound and Down, and they wanted to film it in the Southeast, and they wanted that vibe.
Yeah.
They went out to South Carolina, the crew did, the riders, him being one of the riders, and they were kind of scouting it all out. And I guess they were out one night, and they were like, hey, here's a crazy idea. What if we all just buy a bunch of land here, build our houses, bring our families, and let's just do all of our projects here.
Interesting.
And they flew back, and they had to pitch it to the wives, and wives were like, you're batshit. And they were like, no, you guys go out there. And the wives went out on their own, and they went to Charleston, and they went through all the area, and they came home, and they were like, yep, let's do it. So that crew went out there, and, 10, 15 of them, I don't know the exact number, but they basically bought land, built these houses. Their kids go to public school. They shop at the Walgreens. They get the baby back ribs at Applebee's on Tuesdays, right? They're integrated in the community. But what that's done to South Carolina and kind of the movie scene in the industry and everything else is like...
And Bill Murray piles on.
Well, but there's two things.
Exactly.
There's two things I think to remember to that. One is that a lot of that is because Los Angeles has priced all the production out of the city. And it's one of the things that should be concerning to St. Louis is that we have this tendency to suffocate ideas in the crib. So if we see the money coming from production, will we suffocate it in the crib because we want too much of a tax on that, or we don't incentivize it enough and understand that for an industry like film or theater to survive, it's not about the star power, right? It's great that Nikki Glaser can come and do the STL Blues draft, but that's not changing minds. It's the 100 other people who do the lighting and the wiring and the sound and the mixing and the videography and everything else. That's what makes the industry. The star can guide that, and that's fine.
Well, I'll give you I'll give you case in point on Nikki Glaser. Right around the corner is one of her local agents, et cetera, and then 2 blocks down is the guy that actually does 100% of her merch.
And
50% of his revenue is from one client.
And that she lives here.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying...
Look at what Vince Vaughn did for Chicago by living in Chicago. I agree that it's the 100
and
other
doing,
people. But in terms of the branding...
Well, and what was the movie he did where
Beautiful
he was the tour guide? He was the tour guide. The video stuff. The breakup.
The breakup.
But yeah, so I think it's great. So the other example I would give to this theater and film example is when I was out in Herman, I had a property, and they filmed what was essentially a Hallmark movie, a Christmas vintage, and they used one of my properties.
It was OnlyFans, wasn't it?
It was not that.
Okay.
But what was so interesting to me about that was it was a shoestring budget production.
Yep.
It was a Hallmark movie quality of film.
Yeah.
But the amount of economic impact, and to your point, the amount of marketing impact that has for everybody who sees it and says, I didn't know this place existed there.
Right.
That is worth way more than whatever tax credit or
Agreed.
expositional advertising campaign Missouri Economic Development or anybody else could do. And it goes back to that point about this is the Muny's where Broadway comes for the summer.
Yeah.
Because the consumer and everybody else is then allowed to use their imagination about what does that mean and what are the second and tertiary things that have to be true for that to happen.
Look at what John Grisham did for Memphis, or look at what
100%.
What his name is doing for Yellowstone, and what that has done to Montana.
Sure.
I mean, look, Jonathan Franzen, I guess the author, Hickenlooper, the directors. I mean, there's so many people. I think there are 4 or 5 people that were working on The Office, all from Belleville and St. Louis, who didn't even know themselves that they were St. Louisans. And so again, it's something, it's one of those things, we export the talent.
Well,
and it's like it could be being done here.
Well, one thing I want to point out too is because you kind of you talked about how LA is priced out the production, et cetera. I think there's a reality to pop culture production in general too, that the need for a ground zero and everything happens there, that's dissipated. It's over. Commercial, et cetera. For example, I've got friends that are producers out there, and that's where the deals are made. But the videographers will go to Idaho to shoot.
Toronto.
And the sound tech is a buddy that's working in a basement in Oak Park, Illinois, and so it all goes that way. But what it still does is it says, hey, shit happens here.
Yes.
And I think the byproduct of what we're talking about, the potential of St. Louis and these assets and the natural landscape imagine what would have happened. I mean, the lake is already crazy. But if Ozark would have put $2.5 million into a production and build a place, buy some land, around the cove from horny toads, and horny toads is always in the background of an Ozark.
Yeah, that
Gators
Captain Ron's boat.
You know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you mean.
What if they had the shootout in Ozark, right? Imagine if that was a plot theme to have, the shootout.
Well, what's the castle? What's that castle? That's Haha Tonka.
Haha Tonka. I mean,
imagine if that was the Red Wedding was shot there.
Oh my God!
Right.
Yeah. Or imagine the shootout, right? Like
anyway,
people.
It's all you would have to say.
People see that and they say, "Oh my God, where is that?" And then when they realize it's not fictional, it's real, they say, I have to go there.
Well,
but by the way, the lake has gone bananas because people in Texas with all their money have said, why on earth would I spend $10 million on a house at Lake Travis? I can spend $2 million on a palace in Lake Ozarks, and it's easy to get to.
Yeah.
I mean, that lake's been cut in half between KC suburbs and St. Louis for generations. It's a mess. I don't go there anymore. I prefer Table Rock or Bull Shoals, so there's that.
Yeah.
I want to shift it up a little bit, and I kind of mentioned it earlier. We were talking, but I'm going to get you guys' take because I saw the post this morning, and over the weekend, a little compare and contrast of outing and expenses, because we've debated in previous podcasts the value of cheap or affordable versus don't undercut yourself. Saturday went to one of my favorite places in Kirkwood, Peacemaker, Four Hands. Kim and I went there, ordered a couple pints. Pints are great, $6 a piece, whatever. That's what you get. Went to the window. Wasn't really hungry, just wanted a little bit of a snack, right? So I get the banh mi, 3 of them, little mini, the dough circle sandwiches, and they were crawfish. Basically $20 with tip for 3 minis. I mean, we're talking it really, depending on how much I had to drink, could have been 1 biters, but I, politely made them 2.
Yeah.
So 6 bites, $20. And yet, loved it. Great experience. Families everywhere, whole 9 yards. But today, I talked about 21C. One of the cooler renovated hotels downtown here was the old YMCA. It's a group out of, I believe, Nashville that has a number of boutique hotels, and this is one of them. Famously known for the penguins that are throughout.
Well, they're part of Ennismore, which has a terrific bouquet of brands and hospitality groups.
Yeah, it's like
21C is one of them.
21C is like, I think there's like 10 or 12 of that particular line of hotels. Super cool. It's known for the big glass ball when you walk into the lounge, and then they got the wallpaper hallway, and there's art upstairs. It's one of those things that I don't care where the city is, you have to have hotels like that kind of blend the reno, bring in some art and experience. And the Idle Wolf is the restaurant there on the first floor of the bar and restaurant. Spanish influence. They're known dinner-wise for their tapas, traditional tapas, the big dish. You order it, everybody fills their plate. But they're rolling out a happy hour deal, and this is where I'm going with this, in which you get it's Four Hands. It's Four Hands vodka. It's their boutique vodka. So vodka drinks $5, and then they're going to roll out some smoked chili South American cheese burger that's $10. So for $15, it's the drink and the burger and a $5 tip for that same $20 bill. I see value in both, but I wanted to just kind of lay it out as, what do we talk about through the lens of this conversation, like. Is it good to have deals that are that cheap? Because a deal that cheap does not exist in a Chicago. It does not exist in a New York. We have them. Why should we not? Should we not be afraid to talk about them?
No, 100%. So anybody who's listening to this podcast knows that I spent 10 years in Dallas. And in the early 2000s, I always think about like indicators of a growing economy or like a thriving social scene. Happy hour deals are not the for sale sign or like cheap bargains of a struggling place. Happy hour specials are meant to drive attraction and people.
Yeah, because
and,
at 501, that thing goes to $36 for the two.
and you know what? And that's totally fine. But like I remember being in college, and
It doesn't lessen the brand.
It does not lessen the brand at all. And in fact,
801 Chop House has.
I think there was an article a couple months ago. So there's Perry's Steakhouse in Dallas, and they have a lunch special, which is a pork chop, which is amazing. Like I would travel if I could, I would travel to Dallas for the day to get the lunch special pork chop. It's amazing, and I don't think I would buy it at dinner because it's twice the price, and I don't. At that point, you kind of you have a different conversation. But I think to your point, if St. Louis wants to be a foodie city, there's a few levels to this game. On the one hand, to your point, the positive side is the accessibility of delicious food on a global scale, right? Maybe it's not as niche or esoteric, but on high quality, good eats at an affordable entry point, St. Louis wins across the board.
Yeah.
The second portion to that is there are some higher end places that are also good, but at that level, and we're talking at this point, $60 a person for a dinner level. Fewer and further between where I said that's a value. That's great. Once you get up to that next tier where it's discretionary eating, not, I'll call it affordable fine dining, that's where St. Louis drops off a cliff. And I think the most disappointing dining experiences I've had in St. Louis have been at that, like, maybe we're going to spend $150 a person.
Yeah,
like one
white
time.
tablecloth.
It just doesn't compare. And the disappointment, though, is that we should. Because St. Louis, unlike most other cities, within a 40-mile radius. I was telling somebody earlier today, did you know that up until maybe 6 years ago, we had the number one Chevrolet goat cheese producer in the world in St. Genevieve?
Yeah.
They were a couple hours down the road.
Yep.
Not one foodie in St. Louis knew that,
Yep.
right? And so I think there's things like that where it goes to this brand promise or this we're not a foodie city because we have a bunch of cheap burgers or a bunch of pub burgers or a bunch of different takes on pub fries and other nonsense. The next iteration, what we run up against is we have a big C culture of being cheap, and people are unwilling to spend that extra marginal dollar for something exceptional. And so we are capped at the level of what is really like a Pappadeaux's affordable fine dining kind of price point. And this is the evidence. There's not one restaurant in the St. Louis region or Missouri that focuses on like carp, which is an invasive species, and hyper local ingredients. When that emerges, then we will be a foodie city. Yeah. But the fact that it is not here suggests
carp is a trash fish, though. Those of us in the Midwest fish.
But so is catfish.
Yes, but when you put a lot of beer batter on it.
But you know what? The indicator of fine dining is taking something that is otherwise considered commodity or trash and elevating it to a place. And the story there is these invasive carp are destroying our local ecology, and so we must find a culinary use for them to diminish the population. And oh, by the way, that are complemented by these things like heirloom corn or these other things that are local.
The Ozark.
That is a foodie scene. And to your point, if you have a distinct Ozark cuisine, the same way that Charleston in the South and New Orleans and all these other places in a garden and gun context do, that is a scene. But what we have is sort of capped out at that affordable fine dining and the it's sort of that like we like the.
But I think you have to draw. I think you have to draw a difference though between utilitarian and experience. Because there's also you can go up and down. Choose the food category, whether it's not seafood. Seafood is one here that I have a hard time finding and loving.
Sure.
Well, how
in
about
this
deer?
market.
Where would you go to get deer back straps, like smoked deer
Other
back
than
straps
Peacemaker.
and heirloom corn
Yeah,
in
exactly.
St. Louis?
Well, here's the thing about deer. Growing up here and having half of my family leaving on November 4th or whatever the date is to go kill deer and then bring it all back in their own special variations, it's volume. So deer to me, given its volume, since I was a little guy, it's always around, whether it's jerky or straps or ground or whatever. I don't care how you cook it. It's not boutique-y to me because it's overly available.
Okay, how about
lobster was in Maine?
how
Yeah,
about
exactly.
that was
Exactly.
prison. That was prison food.
But-
How about pastured pork or pastured, grass-fed cattle from within 50 miles? Right. This is the distinction where I'll at risk of sounding elitist is when St. Louis says that it is a foodie town. It is a town that likes to eat affordable fine dining, keyword being affordable, but is unwilling to leap to that next level of being, I'll use Michelin star as an example. There's nothing so special about it as to be Michelin star.
Why isn't Michelin here?
I'm sorry?
Why is it just James Baird? Why isn't Michelin in St. Louis?
Exactly the point. That elevation beyond that, to me, goes back to there is a big C culture of cheap. I don't see the value in this extra artistic level or this extra artisanal level of cuisine.
Michelin's
but I
all
think-
over cheap.
I totally
all
agree.
over
Yeah.
cheap restaurants.
Well,
Yeah,
look,
but I think you're ignoring the fundamental principle that Midwesterners in general lead with pragmatism and utilitarianism over experience and surprise me.
Okay,
we don't
but
we don't typically like to be surprised. We like to be maybe like thrown off a little bit.
But can I give you an example?
well, wait, but the but is, but we call ourselves a foodie.
No, I understand, but so much of
That's
it, so
nuanced.
much of it has. So take Danny Meyer for example.
Correct.
He's on the list. No one has any idea that he's from St. Louis, and so if you read his books,
Yes.
he would say, his burger place. He would say, what's the name
Tavern
of
on
his
the Green.
No, his not Union Square,
Unreasonable-
but the
yeah.
the chain, the nationwide chain. He would say
Shake Shack.
Shake Shack, thank you. He would say, the smash burger, the custard, the service, so much of that was St. Louis based in his St. Louis experience. And so, culturally, from service to the food to the dishes, and that's the kind of story and the kind of continuity just people around the country are really surprised by. They just don't know that exists.
Shake Shack is a perfect example
And it's working around the country.
of where Midwesterns, kind of St. Louis and like myself, when it comes to food and the definition of quote foodie,
Right.
Here's how I break down a Shake Shack. If I go through, number one, if I go through the drive-through, right,
Right.
it's fast food. And then I order, and I just want a double cheeseburger. Simple.
Right.
Pickle, mustard, mayo, American cheese, whatever. Simple. Maybe a small fry. I don't need a lot of carb. And I don't even care about the drink, because I'm probably got a cooler in the back anyway.
Yep.
Right.
You're going to charge me $22 for that.
Yep.
You lost me. I don't care how elevated that burger is, even, given whatever, and this whole foodie descriptor. And Danny's great, right? He's extremely successful, and that works, and people go after it. But if I'm going to go pay $22 for a burger and a fry, I'm walking into Olive and Oak, or I'm walking into, any number of lo-fi tavern, diner, etc. Not because the food, the variation in the food, I think is, the delta is very, very small.
Sure.
What it is what am I looking at? What am I smelling? What do I see? What's my experience? And to me, that's a bigger definition of the bigger part of the quote a foodie scene. The ingredients are what they are. Everybody has access to the same meat and seafood and veggies and carbs. Everybody has the same palate.
But that's a Kuna Foods and Cisco argument.
No,
What
it's not, because there's plenty of local restaurants that are elevated, high-end, casual, whatever, that do buy from the local butcher that's down, in Valley Park. or grew them out in Washington. I mean, that stuff happens all the time. To me, when I go to another city, a Seattle, or I go to a Denver or whatever, and I want to experience the quote food scene, the space, the vibe is as important to me, if not more so, than the taste.
Oh, I completely agree, and that works. But he was able to really capitalize on
Totally agree.
on that, and I would love to take, Tiny Chef at Silver Ballroom National, or like stuff like
She's
that,
brilliant.
or stuff like stuff like Lona and the dumplings there, stuff like all of the, whether that's the lobster roll at Peacemaker or the little smash burger at Carl's Drive-In, on Brentwood, but just nobody's featured it in a way that there are people who are doing dishes. They've been doing it the same way for 60 years.
Mike Johnson's trying with High Point.
I think
he's doing it.
I think the other way, the only other person who's really, I think Joya's did it, so they got the James Baird recognition.
Correct.
But I would say the thing that about it, maybe we're not technically foodie in that way, but what it is accessible. I mean, you have to understand, if you want a reservation at Rayo's,
Yes.
that's not possible. I think it's annoying when we have a 30-day reservation here. If you want to go to Louis, or you want to go to Wright's Tavern, or you want to go to Baccarat and some of the pizza place. What's the pizza place out in Cottleville? There's some 30-day reservations.
Yeah.
Noto Pizza.
It's by the
Noto Pizza,
the food truck garden.
Yeah,
right there.
Noto Pizza. Think about the equivalent in another market, and it's a 180-day wait, and it's just actually not possible. And so, what is the delta between Gito's and Rayo's? Okay, maybe it's something, but it's not big enough to warrant, I think,
Bingo.
being able to really enjoy the possibility and the accessibility that you have here. And that is the underrated piece that just isn't out there. And frankly, I'm just shocked. I bet you if we were to ask Michelin, they haven't looked at it. They haven't seen it. They haven't even considered it. It's not like they're looking at it and going, oh, well, they don't have this, so they haven't been doing that. It's quite literally, it just never occurred to them that we have what we have going on here.
I think there's a semantics to Foodie Town, right?
Yeah.
If you think about the global parlance of if somebody said this is a foodie town, and like the diners, dives, and drive-ins, that's a little bit cheapening it, but like
Agreed.
I think excellent affordable eats is a whole lot different than Foodie Town.
I understand, but the way I deal with this at work, it's like, I feel like it's an episode of The Princess Bride. Like, I feel like Vicini, like Andre the Giant. I don't think that word means what you think it means.
Totally.
Like people keep saying they're foodies.
Yes.
And I'm like, that's not what a foodie is, but it doesn't matter. It's like, it's a runaway train. So I'm just going with it. So they say, I'm a foodie. And I say, okay. And then they come here and they are just utterly blown away.
I agree.
It's in
That's
alignment.
been my experience when I take people around.
They're compared to what they're used to. I'm not saying you can't eat like a champ in some of these markets around the world, but it's.
Yeah, I mean
JB, can we hit a break?
In 2 seconds,
All right.
because Stat Boy here, I'm over here trying to figure out what
Throw in the stats.
ChatGPT considers as a foodie.
Yeah, what is the definition?
A person with a strong or refined interest in food. It's pretty generic.
Yeah.
Often characterized by a love for eating. That's me.
Yeah.
Cooking. Ditto. And exploring different cuisines and culinary experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Period.
Yep.
So if we simplify and dumb it down, there is no like scientific elevation that is mandatory to define someone or a region as a foodie region. I think it's just you have to have a love for food and the quality of the food and basically know the difference. That's because it's way easier in any market. St. Louis is a perfect market. You drive 25 miles in any direction and you land in whatever that little
Farmland.
that village is, right? And you stop and you try to name your genre, right? Whatever the food is, you're going to get yourself a good burger. You're going to find some good fried chicken. But none of those places are ever going to, kind of clip at that quote, foodie,
And you look at the places that they miss when they leave. So they just say when they leave, they lived in St. Louis, they can't get back to they can't find Adriana's.
Yep.
They can't find a Chinese food.
Yeah.
They can't find the Vietnamese food. There are certain things that they just can't replicate, and those are the things I think we need to hone in on.
St. Paul sandwiches.
Correct.
All right.
Crab rangoon, fried rice.
R.I.P. Mandarin House on Page.
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
seriously.
Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to...
So quick change of plans. We're not going to come back. That's actually the end of the show this week. We did the second half, but it really didn't fit the vibe of the first half, so we're learning. I do apologize if you're looking for more nonsense from us, but in spite of that, again, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, drop us a note, a review, all that other love. We appreciate it. We'll be back. B-Side STL.